Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Danya. In this week's episode, I sit down with Nate Herron. Nate works in the financial industry, but in his spare time, he is a mentor and minister at his local church. In this episode, Nate and I discuss the principles of self-reliance and humility and draw on the work of Jordan Peterson in his book, 12 Rules for Life. Nate shares his experience of being unemployed and how that experience accelerated his growth. Now, Nate enjoys giving back to the community and sharing some of these practices with the people he mentors. I really hope you get a lot out of this episode, and if at the end of the episode you can leave a 5-star review, I would truly appreciate it. Great, Nate. Welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for doing this today with me, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm super grateful to be able to have this conversation with you. But before we get started, I want to give you an opportunity to, introduce yourself, what it is that you do, and where you're based in the world, just so the listeners know. And then we can get our conversation going from there.
Yeah, sounds great. And thanks so much for having me on. I think this is pretty cool. I've watched your live chats. I want to thank, first of all, for when this podcast goes live, that it is audio only, because you're ridiculously handsome and I am not. And so I was really nervous about being on camera with you. And so you've taken all that pressure away from me. So thank you for that. Really reassuring that only my voice is what people will have to listen to and not see my ugly mug. As for me, who I am, where I am, I'm here in central Iowa. I've been here since the early 90s. As a professional, I've been in big banking for about 21 years. I have been a volunteer minister for the past 20 years. I've done a lot of teaching about basic Bible principles, practical guides for life, helping people be successful, happy, and healthy, using principles to achieve those things. And then in the last 8 years, I had started to mentor through my day job college students on choosing paths, career paths, talking about what's important to them, how to get to their goals, making decisions that align with those goals and things like that. So I started formally a what I'm calling a side hustle, Herron Home and Life Solutions, at the beginning of the pandemic, and then recently put it out on Instagram. So that's where people can find me, Herron Home and Life Solutions on Instagram. I'm on Gmail. Through Instagram, you can find my link tree. I published an ebook. And I guess that's kind of the quick and dirty of who I am, where I am, and what I do.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for the compliment. But I guess around the principles that you share, and as you mentioned, as a part-time minister, there's something to be said about those principles and how we can apply them in life. And maybe we don't need to get into the biblical references, but I think a lot of those principles we can all apply in our lives and find meaning and purpose. And I think a lot of these principles, irrespective of religion, are very universal. So what are some of the things that, and you and I have chatted offline, but what are some of the things that you feel are so important, like, especially with college students as they're entering adulthood and about to be independent in their lives? What are some things that you're sharing with them?
Well, number one is usually hard work. Most of the people that I'm talking to don't have a lot of experience, especially in the college segment. And they're coming to the table with all these expectations that have been built up inside them by the university. And they expect to show up and be handed gobs of cash on day one. And they're generally, unless they're like off the charts talented and bring a unique skill to the table, they're going to have to put in the work,
Mm-hmm.
put in the time, pay their dues, and climb the ladder like everyone else did. Um, and so I try to break that easy to folks, and then encourage the hard work that will help bring the rewards down the chain.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess those are the or that's one of the foundational principles that I teach, um, whether it's coming from Jordan Peterson, or it's coming from Simon Sinek, or it's coming from the Bible. People generally want the same things. They want health, they want happiness, they want success. And sometimes they can get a couple of those things, but then they get in their own way on one or more of those things. And
Mm-hmm.
so try to talk through, okay, what's the obstacle? How do we attack that? How do we get you to bridge the gap to get all three of those things?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, right? Because you mentioned people most often get in their own way, and I truly believe that too. And then there's something to be said about obstacles as well. Over the last several months, I've been reading a lot about stoicism, as well as more recently I've started reading in depth about quantum physics, and how there's an aspect of science that you can kind of consider too, in that sense, about obstacles and the type of energy you attract into your life. And So when you say people get in their own way, what does that mean for you? And then I could share what it looks like for me. Yeah.
Well, I can give you one example that's super easy.
Yeah.
Is some people are really talented, and they're pretty healthy, because most people are generally healthy, and
Mm-hmm.
so they get a level of success, and they start to make some money, and then all of a sudden they have a bad habit, and that bad habit, maybe it's over drinking, maybe it's overeating, and all of a sudden um, they are suffering in the happiness portion of their life. Or maybe their bad habit leads to bad health, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden they went from being successful and healthy to now they're just successful, and their health is suffering, their happiness is suffering, and then it starts to impact their success. And all of those things, they're kind of interrelated. And it might just be a matter of tweaking a few things. And I've listened to a few of your live streams, and you've talked about habits and how those can contribute to either good or bad outcomes. And so usually good habits lead to good outcomes, bad habits lead to bad outcomes. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a matter of identifying and trimming those things out, or building them up.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I mean, there's two things that I would like to expand on based on what you said. Like, obviously, the first part, you're right, like 100%. I think we tend to pick up bad habits, and then we wonder why the outcomes are bad, and then we continue to repeat that behavior, and it's a cycle, right? And like the feedback loop we're getting is, hey, you got to make a change, and we don't see that often. The other piece is often, like, even when you do start picking up good habits, you may not see the outcomes immediately. And I think a lot of people get discouraged because there's either lack of patience or discipline. And if the outcome's not favorable immediately, it's, one of the easiest examples is um, going to the gym. You're not going to see the results for some time. Does that mean you give up, or do you stay disciplined and you continue working hard at it, knowing that if you keep it up, you'll see the results eventually?
Yeah,
Um,
I love that example. That's one that shows up in that book, Atomic Habits,
mhm,
where James Clear talks about the valley of disappointment, where you put in all this work and you put in all this work and you're not seeing any results. And he compares it to an ice cube, where
mhm,
the ice cube's 0 degrees and you heat it to 31. And for 31 degrees, nothing happened. And then one more degree, and all of a sudden magic starts to happen,
mhm.
and change comes in rapid succession. And so most people are giving up in that valley of disappointment. They
Yes.
heat the ice cube to 31 and then they give up because they didn't see the result right away. And that's a matter of discipline. It's a matter of patience, and kind of believing in yourself. And maybe that's kind of like a gateway to the idea of self-reliance.
Mm-hmm.
That if we believe in ourselves, then we can work towards whatever the goal is and keep on going, even while we're toiling in that valley of disappointment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think disappointment or obstacles, and like I said, referring to Stoicism earlier, I think, within Stoicism, they preach and I haven't gotten to it, but I ordered some Ryan Holiday books. He's like the modern day Stoic, but he talks about, one of his books is titled Obstacle is the Way. And I think, for me, when I think about that, without reading the book yet, I think there's something to be said about obstacles too, right? If you can truly power your way through that and have, to your point, belief in yourself, that self-reliance, then the payoff is, significant.
Oh yeah.
I think you
There's,
appreciate it even more too, because you know how hard you had to work and how much discipline you needed to get to that point. I think there's something to be said about that. And the times where I've really worked hard at things and in the end, from my perspective, succeeded. And often the success is even far more greater than I had anticipated. So, there's disappointments along the way because you expect that immediate gratification or expected outcome, but it doesn't happen. And if you keep trying, the payoff is sometimes far more significant than you expected. So, there's something to be said about that.
yeah, I mean, that just brings to mind Teddy Roosevelt's idea of living vigorously, and that doing hard things and succeeding at them, that's a gateway to happiness. It's a gateway to success. You mentioned how you had greater successes than you imagined possible. How did that make you feel?
Well, I think
What was,
it gives
go
you a
ahead.
tremendous amount of gratitude. And at the same time, for me, it was like you start believing in yourself, to your point, right? That self-reliance. You're like, okay, I kept at it. I stuck with the process. And sometimes, like, it's a cliche term, but trust the process is real, right? And
Yeah, yes, it is.
yeah,
It's real.
so you see it in sports, you see it everywhere around us, where people that do succeed, you and that's where, I've talked about this quite a bit in my podcast too, but we often see, when we talk about success, we see people's like outcomes and results. We don't really pay attention to all the grind and hustle and the sleepless nights and the hard work and the sacrifices. You don't see any of that. So you just gravitate to the success, and that's I think we do ourselves a disservice when we just focus on that. And I think there's a value in sticking to the process. And to answer your question, I think when those outcomes were a lot more favorable than I had imagined, I think for me it was having more belief and confidence in myself, that when I took the next challenge in life, whatever it was, I knew that I was capable of being disciplined. And I knew that it's going to be a long road and there's going to be disappointments along the way. And if I truly believe in myself, I need to stick this out and keep working at it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you've had those successes and the payoff, emotionally, mentally, and otherwise, to enjoy and share with other people.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't have that kind of, first of all, motivation to get there, but then they haven't experienced the payoff either. And to hear somebody else do it, it's really encouraging. And I think that's one of the things that Jordan Peterson is always talking about: encourage people
Yes.
to get after it, to go do it, and then reap the rewards of putting in that work.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, he said something recently that I had noted down for our conversation. I just don't remember it off the top of my head, so I'm gonna have to look it up here. But it really caught me by surprise. But I agree. He said, I don't tell people they're okay the way they are. No, I say you could be way more than you are.
Yeah. Well, that's really in line with one of the principles, rule number 7, which is work as hard as you possibly can. at least one thing and
Yeah.
see what happens.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you've done that. I know that I've done that. Back in 2018, I had a real transformational moment. I got laid off from my job of 18 years, and I had just said a month earlier at a family reunion, I said, I love my job. It's wonderful. I've achieved what I never thought possible, and they're going to have to pry this job from my cold, dead hands. And a month later, I got a pink slip. And so they pried the job from my hands, and I
Yeah.
wasn't dead.
Yeah.
And so I had to go back to the drawing board. And in doing that, I was in a team of 25 people. All of us got cut. And that happens in big business. The shape of the business changes. Uh, one part of the business shrinks, another part grows, and so I started analyzing. Okay, what's important to me? What makes me feel good? What can I do to add value? And I reimagined my role and applied for it. And out of 25 people, I was the only one hired back into that team. And I've been able to reshape that area of the business, and it's left me feeling really accomplished, but also it gave me all of these wonderful experiences to share with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I've helped a number of the folks in my old team and in other teams since then that have gotten laid off and gone through that experience. And it's a really wonderful thing to be able to help people. And that's one of the other things that I love doing. I mean, it's part of my ministry. It's helping people and connecting the dots, getting over hard spots, and making a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, often people, like, the experience you described, thanks for sharing that. I think a lot of people would feel like a victim or be discouraged, and there could be many outcomes, but often those are opportunities for us to really find something new. I think a lot of the times, and I'm not saying this was the case with you, but a lot of times we get complacent when we've been in a job or at a place for many, many years. We get complacent, and sometimes we need that kick in the butt to be like, okay, well, how can I apply myself more? How can I do things differently? How can I learn new skills? So those are all opportunities we get in life, and it really depends on your perspective, right?
Yeah.
And you can have a negative outlook on it, or you could look at it as an opportunity and make the most of it. So yeah, so I think that's important. And then, going back to your point on service, I think even just serving people and making a difference in people's lives is fulfilling in that sense, right? Where when you can give back to community, I think that's important. And I think all of us, I mean, I've yet to meet a person who hasn't felt good about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was thinking about that as you were speaking, and there's really three big bonuses that come from putting in the work. It's you're not imposing a burden on others. You're able to provide for yourself, and you're a dad. I'm a dad. Being able to provide for your children and your spouse, that's a really good feeling.
Mhm.
We're a one income family, and when I lost my job back in 2018, I was pretty emotionally devastated because a
Mhm.
lot of my identity was invested in what I did for for work,
Yeah.
which sounds kind of crazy because I work at a big bank and um, I'm just kind of a number there. But at the same time, I was like, that's me. And so I went through all this grief and anger, and I couldn't believe it. It was like a death, really. I went through this whole process, and I had to do it really fast because there were three people that wanted to eat,
Mhm.
plus myself. And so I had to solve the problem of, okay, how do I get over this emotional crisis that I'm having, this crisis of confidence? Because I was like, am I worthless now? Um, and uh, bridge that, get over it, and then, okay, I got to move on to the next thing, and I got to be successful at that too.
Yeah.
And so then once I was able to not be a burden on someone else, my my extended family, my parents, my in-laws, whatever, I was able to provide for my family, I immediately wanted to share that around and help other people do it,
Yeah.
so that they could feel the same I did. You're right. I've never heard anybody say that they didn't enjoy helping other people
Yeah.
uh, get the same success that they're having.
Yeah, and I mean a common theme as well to your point, like and I've experienced it myself, and a lot of people that come on this podcast have experienced is like often the adversity we face is almost like a catapult for us to be able to help other people in that same sense. Like we realize that, hey, I went through this. It was devastating in the moment. It was a great learning experience. Now how can I help others go through something similar? And it goes back to the service, right? And I feel that we are fortunate and very fortunate in that sense that we get to go through those life experiences and then be able to put ourselves in a position where we can help others as well.
Totally agree. I don't think it could be said better.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And then so I mean kind of shifting over, like, so we talked about self-reliance. There was other pieces that you wanted to touch on. So do you want mind elaborating on the next piece?
Yeah, sure. I guess we've analyzed it, the two of us, from the perspective of how self-reliance can be a good thing. It can also be a pitfall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another principle that Jordan Peterson talks about. The Bible talks about it as well. Rule number 11 is don't allow yourself to become arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even a subpoint in that chapter about the danger of arrogance and deceit, and how basically if we start to believe that we're smarter than everyone else around us, then we can actually, lie to other people, lie to ourselves, and have a distorted view of justice and really the world, which can lead to some really vile things.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a very important piece. And I just want to highlight for listeners, the references you're making are from Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. So the first one reference you'd made was chapter 7 from that book. And then this one's chapter 11. I think there's value in knowing that too. And I think a lot of the people that we see that are really successful or have done well, they tend to maintain a sense of humility. And I think the moments where I've also been humble, I've been able to learn far more from other people, but I'm also able to see my own blind spots. And to your point, when we get arrogant, we almost forget that we have blind spots and we assume we have all the answers. And to your point, that is a pitfall because we stop learning and
Right.
we lose our curiosity. And I think when we have that humility, we're always open to another opinion, a different perspective, regardless of who we're talking to. If we can have that open mind that, hey, this person might teach me something, there's so much value there. And I think that's one of the best ways to avoid that arrogance and not get, not fall into that trap of our blind spots.
Yeah, we can, if we fall into that trap, we stop treating people with the respect that they deserve. It can be harmful to our relationships. And you mentioned our blind spots. We end up creating blind spots because we deny that we need to learn anything. And so it's a real trap, because once you hit a certain level of success, everybody's like, oh man, you're so smart, or you're so successful. How can I be just like you? And um, I think that's why it's so important to keep going back to the principles that helped get you there, because they'll help keep you grounded in, you know what, I haven't mastered this. Uh, there's I can do this better. I can do that better. And I can learn basically new tricks
Mhm.
to help me to get to the next level of whatever it is I'm pursuing.
Mhm.
And we don't want to shut ourselves off to learning. And by becoming arrogant, we basically put ourselves in a position of making really terrible mistakes. There's a expression that beware that he that is standing does not fall, or pride is before a crash, right? So
Mhm.
an arrogant person is more likely to make those really big mistakes that lead to serious consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess when you're kind of doing your ministry work or you're working with college students, what are some pieces of guidance you give them in this space? Because I mean, you know, it's one thing that you can give someone advice, and it's another thing when, as a young adult, if you're all of a sudden, getting successful, especially in your own field, it's hard to remember that advice, and often we need to either make a mistake or experience adversity to gain that humility back. And sometimes you can't teach that to people. They need to experience it for themselves. So, how do you navigate that space when you're working with people?
Well, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of people who are new in the industry, in different industries. Primarily, my experience is in finance and banking. And there are kind of two types of college students that come in. There's the kind that already know it all, and then there's the kind that are teachable. And maybe you've heard the expression, you have two ears and one mouth, because we should listen twice as much as we speak.
Yeah.
Um, and I've seen those students come in that are that know it all, and they almost immediately end up having a chip on their shoulder because they keep making mistakes and they keep struggling and fighting, and they end up being really unhappy, and a lot of them end up leaving or failing spectacularly. Um, but then those that are kind of the more teachable, trainable, end up going on to do really great stuff. And so I just encourage people, um, have your ears wide open, listen, learn the process, try to improve the process. And that means don't approach everything that you learn with there's only one way to do it.
Hmm.
Approach it with the eyes of, okay, this is a process, but does this make sense? And ask questions.
Hmm.
Questions are a great learning tool. And that's really how I came to grow in the industry I'm in, is by asking questions. I came in at the bottom rung, absolute bottom rung. And I climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed. And along the way, I asked questions and I learned the business and I learned how to make a difference, to make things better, to add value. And that served me really well. And so that's the same advice I give to especially students.
Yeah.
But anybody that's at an inflection point in their career, you know, where are you at? What are you trying to get to? And let's figure out what are the missing steps to get you there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's other ways you can do that too, right? Like, often looking at your peers or other people and trying to understand how are they doing it. And there might be some, ways you can learn in that sense too, to look at how other people are doing it, because we may think we have the right way, and we seldom do.
It's true. And there's no shortage of opportunities to learn new ways to do things. I've been in the same department now for coming up on 5 years, and we have a pretty consistent product that we produce, developed and rolled out 5 different ways of producing that product, different systems, different written procedures, um, and there is a lot more than one way to skin a cat.
Mhm.
And I am more convinced now that there isn't a process that can't really be improved. You just have to look at it long enough and be willing to try new things. So many
Mhm.
people are like completely averse to change, and there's lots of things out there that you can change and make better. So don't be afraid to try new things.
Mhm. For sure, for sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then you had one more point that you wanted to cover. So we've talked about self-reliance, and then we've talked about the pitfalls of being overly self-reliant, and obviously humility. And then the last point.
Oh yeah. I thought you were going to chime in on it. Is the importance of passing these things on to our children. You're a dad. I'm a dad. We want our kids to be successful, and the importance of sharing what we've learned. And we've talked about sharing what we've learned with other professionals, other adults. But what's more important than teaching our kids the value of work? I've been volunteering, teaching financial literacy, budgeting, savings, building credit, borrowing money since 2003 through the community outreach program that my bank offers. And I go into schools, grade K through, we've even had some junior college students, K through 12 and beyond. And those lessons, I've always asked, who likes to work here and who likes to work hard? And it's amazing that there's usually about half the class says, yeah, I like to work hard. The class, no hands. And so I really encourage that. I think it's important. I've tried to model that behavior for my kids, and set up, good rules, boundaries, and routines that contribute to those things. What strategies do you use to help show your kids that the value of work and the value of believing in yourself?
So I mean, I only have one and he's 8, so it's a bit, I mean, he's still fairly young in my mind, but some of the things I actually read a post by Adam Grant this morning, and kind of on a bit of a tangent, but fairly limited, fairly connected to this, but around reading. So if we want our children to read, we need to model that. We can't just say, hey, go read a book. So, for me, I love to read. And when my son sees me reading, he's always inquisitive about what I'm reading. And he tries to ask, obviously the books are a lot longer than he's used to. So he'll ask me for the Coles notes. So I'll give him a high level understanding of what I'm reading and why it's important. And he really has as an 8-year-old, he has a really cool perspective where he will inquire about it. And he's like, well, why is this important, Dad? Like, why is it, why are building good habits good for you, right? So we have that conversation. And then over Christmas, I bought him a book set and he's slowly reading through that. And anytime he sees me reading, he'll sit down and start reading too. So I think to answer your question in a nutshell, it's and you alluded to it earlier, it's role modeling those behaviors that we want our children to adopt. And I talked about it during the Instagram live Pierre and I did last weekend on fatherhood too. It's we could tell our kids to do certain things, and that's great, but they're watching us. They're watching our behaviors, and they learn by watching. They don't necessarily learn by us telling them. And at the same time, if we tell them something and we end up not doing it and contradict ourselves, guess what? They lose trust or they get confused. And those are all things we need to be mindful of when we're passing on knowledge and information, not only to our children, but people around us. If we say one thing and do the opposite, I think, that's the worst thing you can do. You've all of a sudden lost trust, and people will not only lose trust in you, but they'll also lose trust in the message you're trying to convey. And you can have right intentions and a very powerful message, but if you can't back it up through your actions, you've lost all of that value.
Yeah, and that kind of relates to principle a principle that Jordan Peterson has in Rule 4, which is notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. And he's got kind of like a subpoint in there about happiness and responsibility are linked. And if we don't pursue happiness, or that we shouldn't pursue happiness, but rather we should pursue responsibility, which begets opportunity to work. And there's where you find satisfaction and happiness. And
Yeah.
so I tell my kids that, you know, there's so much chasing after happiness. And people usually chase happiness through pleasure, whether that's through food or drink or relationships. And they think, oh, if I do this thing, I'm going to feel good. But
Mhm.
the reality of it is, um, having meaningful relationships where you're actually impacting people in a positive way through responsibility is far more satisfying, and lasting happiness comes from doing meaningful things,
Mhm.
building relationships. um, I've felt more happy and satisfied as I've tried to pursue being a better dad,
Mhm.
being a better servant to the community. Um, I, as a minister, naturally say that a relationship with God is really important.
Mhm.
And so many people get great happiness out of doing things that are spiritually edifying, doing things that are edifying to their families.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to, like you just said, role model those behaviors for my kids. And um, it's one of those things where I don't always have all the answers, and um, I want my kids to say, when they don't know the answer, hey dad, what should we do here? And if I can't off the cuff know what it is they're after, I say, well, you know what, let's do research on it, let's find the answer together. um, and being humble enough to say, I don't have all the answers, but I know where we can find them,
Yeah.
and let's find them together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's amazing. I think that's really important, but because and I think we also want to role model that it's okay not to have the answers, because there are going to be times. So, to your point, if you don't have the answers, how can we find them together, or at least look for them? So I think that's really important. And going back to the piece of happiness too, to me, happiness is really a choice. And if we're constantly chasing it, it's just going to be, I believe, a never ending journey of this chase of pleasure or happiness, because you're never going to attain it. Or even if you feel in that moment you've attained it, you're going to want more. So I think, from personally, the way I look at it is happiness is a choice, because whatever it is you choose to do, and if you truly believe in it, and you're making a difference, and you're making a difference in other people's lives, you should be able to choose happiness for yourself, just through your actions, and be content. So that's how I look at it. But I agree, it should be our responsibility, and then happiness should be a choice, not a byproduct or an outcome.
Yeah, you know, that's a nice thought, because there are a lot of folks out there that have all the ingredients for happiness, but the happiness isn't inside them,
Mm-hmm.
and they're still terribly discontent, even though maybe they've got good health, they've got success, they have material comforts and pleasure, and yet they're still dissatisfied. And so in those cases, maybe it's something chemical, maybe it's something that in their past, maybe it's a trauma. Um, Maybe it is, I know you've talked about this on some of your past podcasts about dealing with guilt and self-forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some of those things can be real major obstacles to happiness too. And that's why people need to talk about these things and figure out, hey, what's at the root of this? Why do I still feel awful, even though, I've got everything going for me?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there was just that terrible story about a lady who was, I don't know if she was Miss Universe or Miss USA, and she jumped off the top of her apartment building in New York City, just like last week or something.
Mhm.
There's a person that achieved one of the top honors in her field of pursuit, something she probably poured her life into. She
Mhm.
was in media and all this other stuff. And, somebody that takes their life is not happy.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just really sad that so many people are not finding happiness, even though a lot of the principles that can lead to satisfaction and happiness are out there. People just have their hands around them. And that's why when you find them and when I find them, we're like, man, we got to talk about this stuff because it works.
Yeah.
And I want other people to feel as good as I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And you said it really well. Happiness is something we need to find inside of ourselves. And I think where people get lost is where they're seeking it externally, whether it's through other people, through material things, through wealth, whatever it is. And that's the mistake. I think happiness should be within ourselves. And as I mentioned, like, kind of reading through a lot of the quantum stuff, when you kind of look at it from that perspective too, it's very similar. But what Dr. Joe Dispenza says in one of his books is, if our thoughts and our feelings are in alignment and if they're congruent, that's when we're at our happiest, right? So
Mm.
if I have a thought that I'm doing really well, I'm a happy person, but if I don't feel it in my body, then there's going to be misalignment, or vice versa. But once the two are in alignment, that's when we attract happiness to ourselves, because we're feeling and thinking the exact same thing at the same time. So I think that's really important in my mind.
Yeah, I really like that. I have not heard that before.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like the quantum side of things is very scientific, but when you kind of apply it to an emotional side of things, as humans, as individuals, there is that component of what religion preaches too, of really, like being content, doing your best, having a positive outlook on life, and then believing that good things will come to you. So there's a lot of overlap there. It's just more scientific from that standpoint.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that side of it too, and I think it's really important when you're in alignment with everything. And for people that do experience that alignment, you notice how you're content and happy.
Does that have anything to do with your relationships as well? That quantum physics portion? Like, is it about the people that you surround yourself with contribute to it, or is it all internal?
No, I think so. I mean, the quantum side of it is very energy based. So basically, what you put out there is what you're going to attract, and that same thing applies to people, right? If you've got a positive outlook and you treat yourself well, again, if your thoughts and your feelings are aligned in terms of how you treat yourself, those are the people you're going to attract into your life. It's just that energy.
Okay.
So, and we see it all the time, right? Like for example, like when I'm around people that don't align with my energy, I just feel either like my energy is being depleted, I feel out of sync, I feel exhausted, and that's how I know that these are not potentially the people for me. Whereas when you're surrounded by, people like yourself that are very similar and you want the same things in life, you actually feel energized, you feel hopeful, you feel great. So yeah, I think the same thing applies to relationships and the people you attract into your life.
Yeah, interesting. I had heard something, and I'm going to get the quote wrong, but it's something about either take you are the average of
Yeah,
your 5 or 7 closest friends. I can't
yeah,
remember which,
yeah. I
but
did something similar. Yeah,
okay. So I mean, that kind of sounds like what you're talking about there.
yeah,
So if you have 5 friends and they're all like just stand-up guys, fantastic people that have great qualities, you're going to have great qualities too because you're going to be like them.
yeah,
But you sub 1 or 2 of those people out with rotten people, and you're going to start seeing negative consequences because their influence on you, the average of those. So that's, I mean, there's a principle in that too, that bad associations spoil useful habits. So you
Yep.
spend time spend time with the wrong crowd, and you're gonna end up making some of the same mistakes that they make.
Oh yeah.
But you spend time with the right crowd, and you're gonna start making good decisions.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. I mean, there's biases around that too, right? Like when you surround yourself with similar people, then you start thinking the same. It's only
Mhm.
natural, because they're influencing everything you're thinking, right? You're having certain level of conversations that's impacting your decision making, stuff like that too. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Cool thinking. I, I read something, I don't know where it was, about a guy who rented a house in the most expensive neighborhood he could afford because he said, these neighbors are going to become my friends and I'm going to be successful like them because of osmosis. And it was just like, I, I can't imagine thinking that way. And yet somehow he made it all work. And, it's again, kind of like that average of your 5 closest friends. Like he must have got really tight with his neighbors really fast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's one way of doing it. But I agree. Like, yeah, you have to be mindful of your social circle and who you surround yourself with, because that plays a huge role in everything you do. So it's important for sure. But yeah, Nate, I want to thank you for doing this. This was great. I really enjoyed this conversation. Time flew by. And again, super grateful that you were able to come on and have this conversation with me. For and I know you mentioned your Instagram and email earlier, but for people that want to get a hold of you or just chat with you, what are some of the ways they can do that, whether it's online or social media?
So Instagram, you can DM me through my Instagram account. You can hit me on Linktree. I have career counseling as one of my menu items there. Links to my LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there, and you can DM me there as well. I love talking about people that are in career transition or crisis, like I was,
Mhm.
because I've been there. I know what it's like, and I'd like to help people get through that. Um, and I guess if you're in Central Iowa, you can find me find me in the West Des Moines West Des Moines phone book.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again, Nate. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Been a pleasure. I enjoy your live streams with Pierre, and I look forward to watch more of them and enjoying your podcast on Spotify. So thanks for having me.
Well, I know I appreciate you tuning in and engaging during our lives. That's always fun. You always give us something to think about. So, Pierre and I both appreciate that.
Yeah, well, cool. I hope I don't derail you guys, but always a pleasure, and look forward to the next one.
Sounds great. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. As always, please subscribe to the podcast if you enjoy the episodes or leave a comment in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. Thank you again, and until next week.